Someone had to remind me to mic up here too. Can't see what I'm doing. Devoted to one another. Romans 12, verse 10, New American Standard says giving preference to one another in honor. NIV says honor one another above yourselves. I was at Indianapolis Thursday, Thursday, and it was a reception. And I said something to Allison about going to a reception. She said, "You're being received?" I said, "Well, no, a reception is not in my honor, but I was cordially invited to receive another." There's been a new appointment in one of the agencies. Governor made a new appointment. It's been about a month and a half ago. And so this was a formal, if you want to say formal, it was an official reception for this new director. And I'd already had a chance to meet him and talk to him a little bit. But Allison said, "Are you being received?" And I said, "No, I'm one of the receivers." But I still had an invitation. And a formal invitation is a form of, sometimes they say, "Honor us with your presence." And you kind of look at that and you think, oh yeah, what big deal, honor us with your presence. But that is one form of how we honor one another, is just being in each other's lives. That is a form of honor or preference or giving preference. It's taking away your choice of what to do with your time and devoting it to someone else's attention. I think this devotion and honor is important. I don't think it has to be written invitations or formal in any way at all, to be in the spirit of honor us with your presence. We can ask that of others, and we can deliver that to others without being asked. It's not something we have to wait for a written invitation. And that's a phrase I will use. Are you waiting for a written invitation? You're not going to get it. You need to jump in. You need to be part of this. You need to be active. And no one's going to have to write it out in longhand to get you to pay attention to something. The lesson gives an example of a young man being encouraged by it says elderly widow in the fourth paragraph here. 16-year-old John broke out in a sweat as he gave his first invitation talk. And widow says, "John, I want you to know how much you encouraged me. Seeing your great example and hearing you give the invitation tonight was the most uplifting part of my day." I remember meeting a preacher one time and not being impressed, not being favorably impressed. I guess I had an impression. And my first meeting or first one or two interactions with this minister of the gospel was, this guy's a phony. He's just over the top with, "It's so good to see you, and I'm so glad that you're able to be with me today, and I'm good. It's good to see you doing well." And I thought, he just lays it on a little too thick. And it kind of was off-putting to me. So what was I looking for that I wasn't seeing on first impression? "Oh, you look lovely today. Greg, your hair looks great today." Okay, you can't fool me with that one. What am I seeking that is missing in that transaction? Sincerity. Sincerity of heart. You can't really mean it when you say, "Greg, your hair looks great today." Samantha keeps giggling. She's rubbed the top of my head. She knows there's not much snow on the mountaintop. And I administer my own haircuts. So that tells you all you need to know. Sincerity of heart. Upon getting to know this minister better, I realized it was sincere. That the guy really just had that much positive attitude, really had that much regard for other people that he got excited just to meet you and just to talk to you and just to spend some time with you. And I realized, oh, he really means it when he says that. It's just great to see you. How do we have sincerity in our devotion to one another? What does that look like on the ground? When you go to Pat's house, she starts pulling out the cushions for the outdoor patio furniture because she wants you to sit and visit. That's from sincerity of heart. That's from a desire to spend time with people. That's real. That's not a written invitation, but it's an invitation nonetheless. And it's one that comes from the heart. How do we do that? How are we real for one another? How are we sincere for one another? Is it just the way we sound? Is it just our words? Or is it more? Samantha mumbles under her breath, action. Action. It requires engagement. A gift of time, a gift of interest. Sincerity is important. But I think all of us can be more purposeful in giving honor or preference to the parts upon whom we bestow less honor. To me, that is the core of this lesson. It's taking assessment of who it is we give honor to and who that comes more naturally to us to honor as compared to the ones that don't receive our attention, time, or recognition as easily. And what does that mean for that person when there's a kind word and a kind action? When it's someone that maybe you don't have as much rapport with, that you don't have as much familiarity with, and you create that connection, create that desire to be with that person and to encourage them. Honoring those who are not as likely to receive an honor. There's another aspect of honoring those not as likely to receive honor, and I started to touch on it last week, I think it was, about how Jesus noticed when he was invited to attend the home of the Pharisee. It wasn't in our reading, but after that exchange, he talked about that a little bit. He didn't really even, it was more perfunctory. It was more as a duty than it was as an honor. But he goes on to talk about those that you have to invite to a feast. He says, don't invite those that can repay you. And I think in his teaching, he was not saying you can't have dinner with your kids, but don't make it a habit of only having time spent with those who can reciprocate. He says invite those that don't have the ability to have you, and to show honor and preference to you, and give attention to their needs as well. And I want to say don't always just invite your family or those close to your best friends to come and spend time with you, but have giving preference and honor to those who cannot give back to you in the same way that you can give to them. And is that in Luke 7? I may be Luke 7, but I can't remember now. Let's just turn over to Luke 7. Maybe that's where I want to be. I think it is. Well, since I just paraphrased half of it, oh, this is not what I was thinking of. This is the centurion who asked for help regarding one of his sick servants. And this centurion, meaning he is a what? What's his nationality? Roman. What's his occupation? He is military. Yes, a centurion would have direct command of 100 troops, 100 men. So this Roman centurion calls upon Jesus and he says, I didn't even want you to come and trouble yourself to come to my household for this ill servant who's very ill, regarded to be about to die. Lord, don't trouble yourself. I'm not worthy for you to come under my roof. For this reason, I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority with soldiers under me, and I say to this one, go, and he goes, and come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it. Jesus said, when he'd heard this, I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith. So here's an example of one who has a high regard for Christ and a position of great humility for himself. And in that exchange, Jesus is impressed. He's impressed. This man showed honor for Christ, and in the most humble way. He did not want to be a bother. He wanted to keep out of his direction, so as not to be trouble to him. And Luke 7 is not the reference I wanted. Yes. Thank you. So there's the account of how, when you were invited to a wedding feast, there's to be consideration for where you place yourself, or you might end up taking the high position or the position of honor, assuming that is due you. You know, I'm the senator, so I walk in and I take the best seat and I say, this is where I belong. And then whoever's running the party says, I need you to get up and go over here because the governor's coming or whatever. And I get moved out. And the instruction from Christ is better not to exalt yourself because you might cause embarrassment. You might realize that your place is to be in a more humble state than you assumed. I don't think Jesus is really talking about dinner parties as much as he is other things. And here's where he goes into in verses 12 through 14, the idea of reciprocation that we just talked about. So these are ways that you think about how people like to honor themselves or see that they themselves are the recipients of honor. And Jesus focuses on why don't you rather give consideration for others and honor those who don't have repayment come to you in the way that you interact with people. Any thoughts or comments on those verses as we look at that? Let's pop over to Luke 19.
Greg?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Jim.
Talking about what you say to people to encourage them. A long time around town, if I go to the drugstore, the lumber company, the place to eat, I tell the person serving me, I said, you did a good job. I said, tell your boss, I said, give you a raise. That perks them up. And then I told one woman that one day, and she said, I am the boss. So she probably got a big raise.
I hope you're a good tipper, too, if you're going to talk like that. because we have to have actions to our words, right? Luke 19, the account of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, if you know the song, was a wee little man. And as Jesus was passing through Jericho, he wanted to get a better view of Christ. Zacchaeus' trade is what? Tax collector. We probably understand he is not well regarded among his Jewish community because he's collecting taxes for the Romans or for the Roman Empire, even though he's a Jew. He is not their favorite guy in town to see. Tax collectors may have had a reputation for over assessment so that they could pocket some of that for themselves. Zacchaeus was rich, which also lent to that social stigma in being a tax collector. Well, where did he get all his money? He's fleecing the people. And he's fleecing his own kindred, his own kinsmen, at the expense of us so that he can enrich an occupying country, an occupying government. We are on the border here of sedition. We are on the border of this is a crime against the state of Israel. Now, they didn't run them out of town and throw them in jail because they didn't have the authority to do that. They didn't have the power, and they were afraid of the Roman Empire bringing down problems in their lives if they did so. But they didn't care for Zacchaeus, one can assume. When Jesus said, I'm going to stay in your house today, the people who heard this and saw this began to grumble because they said, he's going to be the guest in whose house? They didn't say Zacchaeus' house. They didn't say the tax collector's house. Whose house is he going to be the guest of? A sinner. And would these same people not have acknowledged that all of them are sinners? And the answer is no. They wouldn't. Because they thought themselves to be children of God. And therefore, they didn't fall into that category. I think today's language, we would say something about someone being a sinner. I don't believe very many of us assume that we are above unrighteousness. But they did. And they ridiculed Christ because he was willing to go to the house of a sinner. Now, what was his real problem? What was Zacchaeus? Zacchaeus needed the Lord. What was his real problem in their eyes, however? What was the real issue? They didn't like the guy. It wasn't necessarily the problem that he was a sinner. They didn't like the guy. I guess in thinking about this, Jesus is going to be the guest in the house of a sinner. What is ironic about this whole exchange? How much do you think that those who were following Christ's teachings and standing back and judging Christ, we're hearing what a great rabbi he is, what a great teacher of the law. Why, he must be a Pharisee among Pharisees. And look at the way he behaves. So they're sitting back with their attitudes, their judgment against Christ. The irony of the whole thing about, well, he's going to the house of that sinner Zacchaeus. What do you think how have they regarded Zacchaeus to this point? When they think Zacchaeus, are they thinking, well, there's a man who lives in sin. He needs the Lord. I should talk to him about Jehovah God and help him to align his heart with God's. Do you think they thought much about the soul of Zacchaeus at that point? And yet to point out or to regard in their mind, we're dealing with a sinner here. That was probably the furthest thing from their mind. the real dishonor here was not that he was a tax collector in their midst, or that he was a Jewish turncoat in their midst, or that he was a rich man among people not of means. The real issue here is that they didn't have any regard for Zacchaeus at all, as a person, as a human, as someone with a heart and a soul. I would argue that this is the first time they ever gave any consideration to the state of heart of Zacchaeus. And at that level that they are doing so now, it's just dismissive. It's not, oh, I hope that the great physician has a chance to touch the heart of Zacchaeus because he has just as much worth and value in the eyes of the Lord as the rest of us. That is not what they were thinking. Okay? You see the layers, the subtlety of this interaction, and how that got to Jesus' point of why he said, I'm going to your house today.
It comes down to preconceived notions. Mm-hmm. He got a label, tax collector. But he says here, I restore people. If they were cheated, I give to the poor. They didn't know him. They just knew his label. Mm-hmm. And so for him, Jesus said, come down. He freely took Jesus into his house. And people were like, what? It's amazing what a label can do to people. This guy was clearly a good guy. He just had a really bad label and a bad job.
He may have had a change of heart with knowing of the teachings of Christ, to where he was transitioning to that position, that place where he wanted to have a relationship with Jesus because of Jesus' relationship with God. There's a hand over here too, Chuck. And I think this idea of label is what the Lord is getting at. We want to give labels too. We want to make sure that Jesus wasn't the social reformer, but he was. That wasn't maybe his primary purpose in being on the earth. It wasn't social reform. It wasn't to change society for the better. It was to seek and save that which is lost. But he had to incorporate that into what he was doing in order to change the minds of those who had labeled and had written off this man. What did Jesus say that this man is? He gave him a term. He gave him a label. And he said, this man is what? He's a son of Abraham. Oh, you mean he's one of us? We thought he was one of them. And that statement, to me, clearly backs up your point of Jesus is pointing out how ridiculous their labels are when they already had a label for this gentleman that they wouldn't apply. He is a son of Abraham. Therefore, the promises that God made to that special kingdom applied to him as they did anyone else.
You almost said what I was going to say. So the Jews then needed to see that. I thought the key words there were he also, because we can use that too. Mm-hmm. So in that case, it was he also is a son of Abraham, which, mattered to the Jews and, of course. But to us, whoever it is, they also have a soul. Nobody that's breathing is not without a soul and deserving of being exposed to the truth.
And this is really the basis upon which honor is due everyone. Why isn't it just that honor is a good thing for us to do, but why is honor due to everyone? Every human being. Why is honor due every single soul on the face of the planet? It's a simple one. God created all of us. We are all metaphysically sons of Abraham, all right? We may not be able to trace the bloodline, but every nation every tribe, every people shall come to the city on the hill, shall come to Zion, and all nations will praise the King. Every one of us is a son of Abraham. You also, or he also is a son of Abraham, is an indication of Jesus' disappointment, too, in that they weren't receiving him. As sons of Abraham, they didn't have the proper regard for Christ either. He, too, is a son of Abraham. But in his outreach to these folks, and as they're standing back and holding their judgment, he observes Zacchaeus is in the same boat as you. You guys are just alike, and you don't know it. And so that was again, I think there's a lot of subtlety in this account, and you have to think about what the exchange is to get the point of it. I think Jesus is knocking them kindly. At the same time, he's recognizing that when they labeled Zacchaeus, they didn't need a label, and they disregarded one they already had. If in their circles, that being a son of Abraham was a big deal, and they decided we're going to throw that one out and use this other label. And this is a big stumbling block to us as we think about to whom honor is due, is to categorize in our mind where people are in their lives, to make assumptions on our part about the receptiveness of anyone to a Savior, and to think, well, we know enough about this person as they're not going to change their ways. They're happy where they are. I'm not going to bother them with, inquiring into, do you know the Lord? Do you know what salvation is? Do you have a hope that's in your Father?
Yeah, it says there that he was going to be a guest with a sinner. Well, see, Jesus lived among sinners for 33 and a half years. He walked with them, he talked to them, he ate with them, and guess what? He died to save them.
Yeah, Jesus was well acquainted with the sinner, and it didn't stop him from interacting. He knew the heart of Zacchaeus better than anyone else there, and he knew of Zacchaeus' faults. He knew of Zacchaeus' problems, and he knew that Zacchaeus wanted to deal with those and wanted to address those. I wish we had a little more backstory on Zacchaeus, but what we see is that he was written off, and Jesus said he too was the son of Abraham, and it was meant to open their eyes. Did they get the point? Do you think they got it? I don't know. Maybe some did. Maybe it took some time for them to recognize after Jesus was gone from his ministry that they had been gifted with a great lesson. But you got to wonder. I guess some probably did and some didn't. But that's about giving preference and honor. Anything else about Zacchaeus or related comments or concerns? John, I can't read. John 13. I want to look at John 13 just a minute. We are familiar with the account. Most of us are, of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples, and it's in preparation for it's during the Passover supper that Jesus actually takes the time to gird himself up and get his towel. He proceeds to begin pouring water in a basin to wash the feet of the disciples. I'm going to let you talk about this a while. I don't want to talk all morning. What do you see? What do you see in this exchange between Jesus and his disciples? And I got one angle I want to explore with you, but I want to hear your thoughts first. Is this an honor that Jesus is bestowing? It's not one we're culturally accustomed to. We were over at Angie Aaron's a couple weeks ago, or last week. I didn't see any foot wash basins there. The Kauai pond probably could qualify, but I think it was still dry at that point. Koi? Koi. Big fishes. No foot washing. Oh, I thought we were honored regardless. I felt honored to be there, but no foot washing. Is this applicable? Is there a lesson here we should get or we can get or not?
I think for sure it's humility, lowering yourself to where I'm above, tearing down drywall or going to spend my time just to listen to somebody or, and that's, we hear that you lower yourself and God's going to lift you up. God's going to honor you because you have lowered yourself to do what we would consider a menial task.
Now, there's even irony in what you said, Chuck. Which of us is on a higher plane that we have to lower ourselves to be equal? None of us. What about Christ? Did he have to lower himself? I mean, yes, he had to lower himself by being in human form to begin with. He had already demonstrated lowering himself. So the real irony of this particular example is that here's the only person that was walking on the planet that could make a legitimate claim to being superior and not needing to be serving others in this humble way. That doesn't apply to any one of us. That doesn't fit any of us in this comparison. So when Jesus does it and says to his disciples, a slave is not greater than his master, neither is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. He said, you call me teacher and Lord, you call me rabbi. And you're right. They called him Lord. He said, you're right. If I then, the Lord and the rabbi, the teacher, wash your feet, you ought also to wash one another's feet. So he acknowledges that he did have to remove himself from the station that he rightly should be in to do this. The thought I had in reading through it this time is this is the Passover feast. We know what's coming, don't we? And we know it's a matter, now you can start counting the hours, not the days, before Jesus' betrayal, trial, scourging, beating, murder. It's just hours. And you're the Lord. Let's put yourself, this is not something we do a lot of. Put yourself in Jesus' place. He's got mere hours to talk to his innermost circle about what the rest of their life is going to look like. Man, I would get the chart out. I would be writing out as much doctrine and as much, this is how it's going to be. Guys, I hope you're taking notes because this is one of the last times I'm going to talk to you about the things that I was sent on earth to do. What does that say about Jesus' choice to use the very last hours of his time with these men to do what he did? What does that say about the importance of having the right doctrine as opposed to having the right heart? You don't throw one out, to have the other. I acknowledge that. But what does coming down, the focus is on the few hours remaining, and this is what Jesus does with his time? The greatest teacher that ever walked on the earth. Is he still teaching? Is this a profound lesson? Is this a lesson that's better communicated with his actions than with his words? And so, if this is what the creator of the universe says in his mind, this is the best way to use my last hours with my disciples, I have to give this message a lot of preference in my mind. Much more than I probably do. And much more than I have thought of before in terms of how the clock is ticking. And there's already the shock value that what's on the mind of the Lord are others when this is what's approaching him. That's already difficult to deal with. Is his concern is for their admonishment and their learning and their growth and their preparation. That's on his mind instead of what it is he's going to have to face as a man. That alone is hard to deal with and to comprehend. But the greatest teacher ever to walk the earth, the one who amazed the rabbis from age 12 with his ability to discern the scriptures, sets his scrolls and his notes aside and he washes their feet.
I was thinking about, and I don't think this is what we want to dwell on as far as time, but, some people question, whoa, should we, because of this verse, should we actually be doing foot washing as a ceremonial part of worship or as something we do in our services? And I think a counter to saying that that's a requirement is there is nothing performative about what Jesus, it's not a performative act that Jesus is performing, to use the same word twice. Performative would be if there's a pretty basin and the towel has this nice embroidery on it that says, so you should also do, and there's ceremony to it. Jesus is doing a chore that needs to be done. If we washed each other's feet as a ceremonial part of our worship, number one, I'd probably spend a lot more time in the shower focusing on my feet on Sunday morning, knowing that I was going to be taking my socks off in front of someone, but my feet are clean. But secondly, it's not a chore that we need done. Jesus is just doing something that needs done because he's seeing the need, and he has compassion. When we were talking about the first question, I was thinking about the number of times it says Jesus had compassion on people. He didn't do something so that it would look good. He did something because he saw what they needed and did what they needed. And he gave people what they required. And that takes compassion, and that takes knowing what someone needs. So that's how we keep it from being performative and ceremonial and make it about, what are the dirty feet in this room that need attention? And I'm not talking about feet. What are the real needs and chores that we need to apply ourselves to?
That was said so eloquently that I'm going to put it in joy words, and that is that I had to look at it as though the Jews were really disgusted at feet. So what does that compare to in my life? What is disgusting to me? Which is not for everybody.
The
But
rest
for-
of us, is that what you're
No.
saying? Okay.
No, I was going to say cleaning toilets, excuse me. But that is what I was going to say is the disgusting thing to me that it would compare to. So if I get that sense from cleaning feet, cleaning toilets, what then would an issue be with another person that I might consider on the same level as that? So I think, let me think here. So I don't know. I just have to think in myself, what are things that I, as though I were a Jew and be disgusted with feet, as a Christian would be disgusted with on that level, but am willing to do it, as Andrew said, because you see a need, so you do that, regardless of how disgusting it is to you or repulsive, or that may not even be something you yourself would do. I don't enjoy cleaning toilets, and not everybody needs their toilet cleaned, but I've just got to look at it in a practical way so I can make the transference to physical and spiritual issues.
I think the point of foot washing was that, as I've had taught to me, and I haven't verified this independently, it was one of the duties of the lowest servant in the house, the one with the least status, to perform for other people. And clearly there's you lower yourself, you lower your head in front of another person. It is a humbling experience. There's no really great way to glamorize it. Cleaning toilets is not a glamorous position, but I don't know that it's as much about being disgusted as it is. I get all kind of magazines and things sent to me, and I remember years ago there was an article in one of the state legislator magazines. We have our own magazines, believe it or not, and it was talking about how, well, you're newly elected, and don't forget that you still need to wash dishes and mow the grass. And I guess some people get a problem with, when they have some sort of status or elevation, the menial things that they used to do, they think they're above that now. And I remember reading that and thinking, well, that's just ridiculous. But the truth is, there are people that behave that way, and it's not because they're elected officials necessarily. It's just, I've reached a certain point in my life, I've reached a certain status in my life where certain things are beneath me, and I'm not going to trouble myself with other people's needs in those areas. We'd like to continue in this lesson for Wednesday. I'd like to pick up on page 22 with the four ways we can encourage, honor, serve. Point 4. And then we'll look at the discussion questions also for Wednesday, our next class.